My name is Sister Paul, but that's not who I used to be. I was born Layla Hamdan in Raqqa, Syria, daughter of an imam, disciplined, radical. At one point, I was one of the most feared female jihadists in the region. They called me the Black Widow of Raqqa. I led attacks, executed missions, trained other women to kill in the name of what I believed was truth. But it was all a lie. The day I died, yes, died, was the day I saw what was really behind everything. Behind ISIS, behind politics, behind the media, behind religion itself. In those few moments outside my body, I was dragged into a realm of pure darkness. And then I met Jesus, not a Western icon, not a myth, a living, radiant being with scars in his hands and love in his eyes. He didn't come to destroy me. He came to wake me up. And what he showed me was terrifying. A spiritual war, older than time. A hidden agenda operating through world powers, religious systems, digital empires. I saw the face of deception and the power of truth. That's when my awakening began. If you're watching this and something inside you feels like it's all connected, that the unrest in the world isn't random, it's because you're starting to see through the fog too. You were meant to see this. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it right now where you are? I want to know how far this truth is reaching across the world. And if your spirit is stirring, subscribe now to this channel. Truth from beyond. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't just my story, it's a message from the other side. And trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming next. I was born in Raqqa, Syria, a city torn by the desert wind and discipline. My name, back then, was Layla Hamdan. My earliest memories were not of dolls or lullabies, but of sermons echoing through the walls of our home. My father, a respected imam, was a man of rigid devotion. Every morning before dawn, he would wake me for prayer, whispering verses from the Quran over my sleepy head. I learned early on that silence was obedience, that emotion was weakness, and that honor came from submission, not just to God, but to the structure we were raised in. That structure, I now know, was the first layer of a much deeper spiritual war, one I couldn't yet see, but one that was already tightening its grip around my soul. My mother, quiet and veiled, barely spoke unless it was to correct my posture or remind me of modesty. Even as a child, I sensed something in her, some buried ache she was never allowed to name. I began to wonder, is this all I was made for? To obey, to fade, to fear. But when I voiced such questions, I was met with harsh correction or complete silence. So I learned to keep my doubts hidden, buried beneath ritual and repetition. Still, something restless stirred in me. I wasn't like the other girls who found contentment in shadows. I wanted more, not for vanity or pride, but because I believed deep down I was made for something bigger. And that yearning, it was the beginning of the awakening, though I had no words for it then. At 7 years old, I was already reciting surahs with perfect precision. I could silence a room full of men with my knowledge, though I was never allowed to lead. I remember standing behind my father one evening as he corrected a younger student. The way he spoke of the West, of Christians, of Jews, it planted seeds of hatred disguised as honor. He didn't call it hate. He called it purity, but something in me knew it wasn't truth. Still, I absorbed it. You do when you're desperate to be seen. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't just being trained in religion, I was being groomed for a hidden agenda, one that twisted faith into fanaticism and prepared me to serve as a pawn in a game much darker than I understood. The older I got, the more I noticed the contradictions. We were taught to despise Western influence, yet we mimicked their weapons and strategies. We were told to fear Christians, yet their underground churches never launched missiles or turned children into orphans. I buried those observations. afraid of what they might mean. But the tension inside me grew, a spiritual pressure that made me feel like my body didn't belong to me anymore. Like someone was watching, waiting, preparing me. Sometimes, late at night, I would stare at the ceiling, feeling a chill I couldn't explain. Was it Allah? Or was it something else? Something darker? Now I know. It was the deception creeping in, slowly wrapping itself around my purpose, distorting the truth into something that looked holy, but wasn't. I tell you this not as a woman seeking sympathy, but as someone who has seen the other side, both of this world and beyond. What I lived through wasn't just cultural. It wasn't just war or religion. It was the early ground of a massive spiritual war, one that's still happening right now, behind every headline, every policy, every drone strike. I didn't know it at the time, but I was being recruited not just into ISIS, but into a cosmic battle where souls were currency. And this was just the beginning. I was 15 when the sky over Raqqa changed. Bombs don't sound like thunder, not really. They rip the silence like claws through flesh. When the first strike hit a few blocks from our home, I remember freezing in place, a bowl of lentils in my hands. My brother Kareem was the one who pulled me down, covered my body with his. He was 2 years older, braver, kinder. He always believed in me, even when my father called me too bold. But that night, Kareem didn't come home. They told us later it was an American airstrike, targeting a weapons cache, they said. But all I knew was that my brother's body was torn apart by forces he'd never met. I watched my mother scream into her hands, and something inside me snapped. That was the day I stopped being a girl. That was the day I started feeding the fire. I remember standing at Kareem's grave, surrounded by whispers of martyrdom and vengeance. My father didn't cry. He simply looked at me and said, "This is your jihad now." I didn't understand what that meant, but it felt like an initiation, like a passing of the torch. In the months that followed, I became obsessed with learning more, not just about Islam, but about justice, revenge, and power. Teachers at our school began to change. Some disappeared. Others came in speaking with new tones, harsher, more militant. They talked about the elite who control the world, who mock Allah and corrupt young Muslims with Western propaganda. And I believed them. How could I not? The West killed my brother. That was all the proof I needed. I started watching videos online, not the ones you're thinking of. Not at first. These were informational, political, full of bold men pointing fingers at America, Israel, the UN. They spoke of a hidden agenda, of a global conspiracy against Islam, and warned of traitors among our own. I devoured those words. The more I listened, the more my heart hardened. And then came the darker content, the sermons about honor killings, the footage of executions, the chants calling for blood. By then, I was too deep. My grief had fermented into rage. I didn't want peace. I wanted to make someone pay. I wanted to make them all feel the loss I carried like shrapnel in my chest. And they gave me the perfect outlet. Christians. I was told they were invaders, agents of corruption, that they were the ones behind the deception poisoning our people. And you know what's crazy? I believed it. Not because it made sense, but because it gave my pain a purpose. It made me feel seen. It gave me a role to play in this massive spiritual war I didn't fully understand. That's how radicalization works. It doesn't ask you to think. It asks you to hurt. And I hurt so deeply, I was ready to burn the world down. The more I learned, the more I felt chosen. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a weapon. I thought it was divine calling, but in reality, I was being used by men, by systems, by spirits I couldn't even see. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to manipulate a soul that's broken. All it takes is a little pain and a little lie, and then that lie grows. It consumes you. It wears the mask of truth. But it's only after you've caused enough damage, after you've watched the light in someone's eyes go out because of your hand, that you begin to question who you've really been. Serving. But I didn't get to that part. Not yet. No, first, I had to rise higher in their ranks. I had to become the thing they wanted me to be. Feared, ruthless, deadly, and completely blind to the truth. They told me I couldn't do it, that a woman's place was behind the curtain, not in the trenches, that my role was to raise warriors, not become one. But I had already buried my brother. I had already buried my innocence, and the fire inside me didn't care about tradition. I was 19 when I crossed that invisible line. I didn't just join them, I demanded to lead. At first they laughed, until I brought them intelligence no man could get, until I stood unfazed under gunfire, until I slit the throat of a captured informant while the others hesitated. That's when they stopped laughing. That's when they started calling me the Lioness of Raqqa. I wasn't proud. I was possessed. I thought I was fulfilling my destiny. My days were filled with blood, betrayal, and belief. I infiltrated checkpoints, gathered secrets from guards, even disguised myself to seduce and kill. I learned quickly how to manipulate men's weakness and how to silence any who questioned me. They feared me because I didn't need their approval. I only needed their mission. Every raid we planned, every Christian we captured, every bomb we planted, I believed it was divine work. I thought I was on the side of light. But now I know. I was serving the darkest corners of this spiritual war, a war that thrives on twisted faith and stolen identity. It didn't take long before I was given command. They let me form my own unit, an all-female battalion. Some of these girls were barely 14. I taught them how to fight, how to shoot, how to kill without blinking. I told them their pain was holy, that their trauma was a weapon. And they believed me, just like I had once believed the lies whispered into my own ear. We became ghosts in the night. Avenging angels, they called us. But in truth, we were broken. Daughters, molded by hate, used by men who called themselves righteous, but had hearts full of hell. There was no grace in what we did. Only control, only deception masked as glory. Behind the scenes, I started noticing something I couldn't explain. The more violent I became, the more empty I felt. There were nights I'd wake up sweating, haunted by the eyes of those I'd executed. I'd hear voices, whispers in languages I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd see flashes of light just before an attack, or shadows dancing in places they shouldn't have been. I thought it was stress. But now I understand. It was the spiritual realm bleeding into the physical. Jesus would later tell me that I wasn't just leading women. I was unknowingly binding souls into darkness. That's the part no one talks about. It's not just about war. It's about possession, about who owns your will when your conscience has been silenced. Still, I pressed on. The more missions I led, the more recognition I received. Foreign. Commanders praised me. Women followed me like I was a prophet. I remember thinking, this must be what power feels like. But underneath the adrenaline, there was a quiet ache I couldn't shake. A sense that none of this would last. That someone was coming. I couldn't explain it, but deep down, I knew. The very force that had brought me to this point was also preparing to break me. I just didn't know how close I was to the edge of death, and to the beginning of a revelation that would change everything I believed about God, war, and the truth itself. By the time I turned 21, my name was whispered like a curse, both feared and revered. They called me the Black Widow of Raqqa. At first, I rejected the nickname. It sounded like something from a Western news report. But over time, I embraced it. Not because I liked it, but because it gave me power. Fear is currency in war. And in a world ruled by death, I was rich. I planned ambushes, coordinated executions, trained girls to become shadows, cold, precise, loyal. To the world, I was a monster in a veil. But inside the ranks of ISIS, I was a legend. They said I was unstoppable, but I wasn't unstoppable. I was numb. What haunts me most now isn't the things I did. It's how right they felt when I did them. I truly believed I was chosen by Allah, that my brutality was sacred. Every woman I punished for removing her hijab, every man I ordered whipped for blasphemy, every family I tore apart in the name of purity. I did it all with conviction. But the more I enforced those laws, the more I felt something watching me. I thought it was angels. Maybe jinn. Now I know. It was the presence of a spiritual war so much bigger than anything I had been told. I wasn't just following doctrine. I was dancing in the palm of a force that fed on chaos, hiding behind verses I didn't fully understand. The deeper I went, the more secretive things became. I started attending private councils, elite leaders who didn't pray, didn't fast, but talked in whispers about controlling minds, manipulating populations, even using technology to spread fear and obedience. They spoke of infiltration, global influence, and alliances that went far beyond Islam. And I started to see it. ISIS wasn't just a militant group, it was a tool in the hands of a hidden agenda, a pawn in a game far older than the caliphate. This wasn't about religion anymore. This was about control. And behind that control, a network so vast and calculated, it could only be powered by something inhuman. I began noticing patterns. High-ranking leaders disappearing after private meetings, intel that came too easily, like someone was pulling strings from above. And then the dreams started. Vivid, terrifying. I'd see blood covering the moon. I'd hear a voice, deep, commanding, saying, "You are not what you think you are." One night, I dreamed of a lamb with eyes like fire. I woke up gasping, trembling, unable to explain what I had seen. It wasn't Islamic. It wasn't even symbolic. It felt like an invasion into my soul, a crack in the armor I had built. And that crack, it began to spread. The awakening had begun, quietly, invisibly. But it was coming. Still, I kept up the front. I doubled down on brutality. I thought maybe if I just pushed harder, I could drown out the doubt. I personally oversaw the recruitment of foreign women, indoctrinating them with twisted doctrine and promises of paradise. Some cried at first, others resisted. But eventually, they broke, just like I had once broken. I led them like a shepherd leads sheep to the slaughter, and I told myself it was righteous. But something inside me whispered, "This isn't truth. This is deception." And the louder that voice grew, the more unstable I became. I didn't know it then, but I was heading straight into a near-death experience that would tear the veil off everything I thought was holy. It was supposed to be a simple mission, a Christian village in the hills, poorly defended, mostly farmers and women. We were to storm in before dawn, destroy what was necessary, take what was useful, and leave no witnesses. I remember checking my rifle one last time, tightening the black scarf around my face. I felt nothing. No nerves, no fear, just that numb emptiness that had become my second skin. But less than a mile from the target, everything exploded, literally. The lead vehicle hit a mine, and within seconds the entire convoy was engulfed in fire. I remember the sound, a roar that didn't come from this world. I was thrown backward, limbs twisted, blood flooding my vision. In that moment, time stopped, and something far worse began. I felt my body on the ground, but I wasn't in it anymore. I was floating or falling. It's hard to explain. I could see myself from above, broken, lifeless. Then the darkness swallowed everything. Not the kind of darkness that comes with night. This was different, thicker, alive. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. And then the voices came. Dozens, hundreds, accusing, condemning, murderer, liar, deceiver. I knew every voice. They sounded like the ones I'd silenced, the girls I'd trained, the men I'd executed, the Christians I'd cursed. Their cries became a storm, and I felt every word cut through me like glass. I tried to argue, to justify, but there was no defense. No escape, just the weight of my own choices crushing me into the abyss. Then I saw them, the spirits, faces with no eyes, circling like vultures. Some looked like children, others like beasts, all of them twisted. They screamed and laughed, mocking my prayers, mimicking the Quran in demonic tones. One of them reached toward me, and when it touched my skin, I felt fire. Not heat, but judgment. This was not hell. Not yet. This was the threshold. And I realized I wasn't being punished by God. I was being claimed by something else, something that had walked with me through every act of hatred I thought was holy. The spiritual war thought I was winning? It had always been winning me. I wasn't a warrior. I was a vessel, and the vessel was breaking. But just when I thought I would be swallowed forever, something pierced through the darkness. It wasn't a flash. It was a presence, radiant, warm, and terrifying in its beauty. The voices screamed louder, as if they feared what was coming. And then I saw him, a man in white, glowing like fire, standing in the heart of the void. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. But I knew his name before he spoke it. Jesus. And when he looked at me, I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel condemnation. I felt sorrow. Deep, eternal sorrow, like he had watched every moment of my life and still came for me. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He showed me, like a film. He replayed my life, but not from my eyes, from theirs. The children I trained to kill, the women I punished, the families I destroyed. And then he spoke, not with words, but into the core of who I was. You were made for more than this. You were made to love. You were made for truth, not for deception. I broke. I screamed. I wept, not for the first time in years, but as if every tear I had ever held back was being ripped from my soul. That was the awakening. The moment I realized the hidden agenda I had served wasn't from heaven. It was from hell, and I had been its instrument. Then he reached out his hand. Light poured from it, brighter than the sun, and I felt warmth cover me like a flood. The spirit shrieked and vanished. The darkness receded, and I returned. Gasping for air, covered in blood, half my body shattered. But something inside me had changed. Not just a moment of emotion, this was revelation. This was the truth. And from that second on, I knew I could never go back. I had seen too much. I had met the one they tried to erase, the one who still had scars in his hands and love in his eyes. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Minutes? Hours? Days? All I know is that something in me had shifted forever. My body was broken. Ribs shattered, leg crushed, blood crusting over burns. But I barely noticed the pain, because what I saw in that near-death moment didn't fade like a hallucination. It stayed with me. It was clearer than anything I'd ever seen with my natural eyes. Jesus. Not the Jesus I had been taught to mock, not the weak Western symbol I thought represented Christian confusion. No, this Jesus was power and mercy in the same breath. A king wrapped in compassion. He had no weapon, yet every darkness around him trembled. And when he spoke, the war inside me stopped. He showed me things I never could have imagined. Not just memories, but truths, hidden under years of lies. I saw the systems we think are political, financial, religious, but are actually spiritual strongholds, interconnected like a web. I saw how the elite manipulate fear through governments, entertainment, even education. I saw how hatred is seeded subtly, how deception is wrapped in good intentions, and how entire generations are being weaponized, just like I was. And then he showed me the cross, not as an abstract symbol, but as my rescue. I saw him hanging there, and I knew. He did it for me. The Black Widow, the terrorist, the liar. And in that moment, I broke open completely. Tears poured down my face, though my eyes were shut. He didn't demand that I fix myself. He didn't wait for a promise. He simply said, "Come." That was it. And I did. I said the only words I could. "I'm sorry. I believe you." As soon as I did, I felt something leave me. A weight. A presence. Decades of darkness, of hatred, of rage. It lifted like smoke in the wind. And something else entered. Peace. Not numbness, not apathy, but real peace. Like warm oil in every crack of my shattered soul. It was as if someone had taken the ash and started shaping it into something new. That's when I knew I was no longer who I had been. What's hard to explain is how immediate the change was. I didn't suddenly become a theologian. I didn't understand everything. But I knew, absolutely knew, that Jesus was real, and everything else had been a counterfeit. Every ritual I had clung to, every doctrine I had fought for, every justification for violence, for cruelty, for oppression, it had all been part of the great deception. And now, standing in this vision, with Jesus before me, I knew the only truth that could set me free was Him. Not religion, not revenge, not ideology. Just Him. And I surrendered everything I was, my name, my mission, my memory, to His mercy. Then He spoke one last thing before the vision ended. You will testify. That was it. A command, a promise, a prophecy. I woke up in agony, half buried under rubble, whispering His name. I should have died there. But He wasn't finished with me. He had pulled me from the pit, not just of death, but of damnation. And now, though I didn't yet know how, I was going to walk a new path. Not as the Black Widow, but as something reborn, something forgiven, something that could never again be used by the enemy. But first, someone had to find me. And the way that happened was another miracle I'll never forget. The smell of fire was still in the air when I felt hands on my body. At first, I thought it was a vision, another torment. But then I heard voices, real voices, speaking gently, not in Arabic. It took me a moment to understand they were Christians, from the very village we had set out to destroy. I tried to speak, to warn them who I was, that I wasn't one of their own, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, my leg twisted, my soul shattered, and still, they carried me. They didn't know yet who I was. Or maybe they did. But they brought me into their home anyway, laid me down, dressed my wounds, prayed over me. With hands that should have struck me down, they offered healing. I kept expecting them to stop, to demand answers, to turn me in. After all, I was the Black Widow of Raqqa. My face was on underground posters. My name associated with blood and terror. But instead, they sang. They read psalms over me as I drifted in and out of consciousness. And when I woke in the night, shaking from fever, I heard one of them whisper, "Jesus, heal her. She belongs to you now." That sentence hit harder than any bullet ever had. I wanted to cry, to scream, to confess everything. But all I could do was listen, and with every prayer they spoke, it felt like Jesus was confirming, "Yes, I'm still here. Yes, I meant what I showed. You, yes, I forgive you." In the days that followed, they fed me, cleaned my wounds, gave me clean clothes. And then they handed me a Bible, gently, without pressure, just an invitation. My hands trembled as I opened it. I had always been told it was corrupted, full of lies, but when I read the words of Jesus for the first time, really read them, it was like meeting Him again. Every line pierced me. Bless those who curse you. Love your enemies. The truth will set you free. I broke down, sobbing, because I knew this was no deception. This was truth. I had never known love like this, not from my father, not from my leaders, certainly not from the movement I once served. I began to ask questions, hesitantly at first. Who is the Holy Spirit? Why did Jesus have to die? Why would God save someone like me? And they answered, patiently, tenderly, without condemnation. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to know that my awakening wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. I wasn't just healing physically. Something eternal was being rebuilt inside of me. I started to pray, not the way I used to, reciting words from memory, but really pray, speak, listen. And sometimes I'd feel Him again. That same presence from the vision, guiding me, reminding me. You are no longer a weapon of war. You are a vessel of grace. They never asked me to repay them. They never demanded anything. But one day, the man who had been caring for me the most, a former pastor, looked into my eyes and said, "When you're strong enough, you'll tell your story. Because this isn't just your rescue, this is a revelation for the world." That stayed with me, because I knew he was right. What had happened to me wasn't just personal. It was part of something far bigger, a spiritual war still raging. And the very people I once vowed to kill, they had become the instruments of my salvation. That's the upside-down kingdom Jesus brings. And it was just the beginning of my new mission. They gave me a new name, Sister Paul. I didn't ask for it. It was suggested by one of the women in the village, an old believer who had once lost her son in an ISIS raid, and yet still cared for me like I was her own daughter. I asked her why Paul. She looked into my eyes and said, "Because he too once hunted Christians, and then met Jesus on a road." I wept when she said that, because I knew it was true. My Damascus wasn't a road, it was a minefield. But the Jesus I met there turned my destruction into destiny. From that day forward, I no longer introduced myself as Layla. That woman died in the fire. I was reborn in grace. I eventually escaped to Lebanon with help from underground Christians. Even now, I can't reveal every detail of how I got out. There were threats, eyes watching, people who would have rather seen me disappear than speak. But I survived. And not just to hide, I survived to testify. At first, I shared my story in secret, whispered in church basements, recorded on old cameras. Then someone posted one of the videos online, and everything changed. Messages began pouring in, from former jihadists, from doubters, from seekers, from broken people across the world who had also tasted deception and were desperate for truth. That's when I realized this wasn't just my healing, it was a revelation meant for others. Yes, there's a fatwa on my life. Yes, I still live in hiding, but I'm not afraid, because the moment I met Jesus, I was already dead to the life I once knew, and truly alive for the first time. Now, I travel in secret to share what I've seen. Churches, refugee camps, podcasts, wherever he sends me. I speak not with polished theology, but with scars that scream truth. I tell people about the spiritual war behind the headlines, about the hidden agenda that's not just in terrorist cells, but in governments, entertainment, media, and even false religion. I tell them that Jesus isn't a Western God. He's the savior of every soul on earth. Arab, Jew, atheist, radical. All of us. I used to be a vessel of hatred, a mouthpiece for darkness. But now I speak life. I tell Muslim women that they are seen, that they were never meant to be tools of ideology. I tell broken men that Jesus is not ashamed of their past. I tell skeptics that near death is real, and so is the other side. And most of all, I tell the church, wake up. There is a war happening right now for the minds, hearts, and eternal destinies of billions. And while we argue over doctrines, the deception spreads like wildfire. But it doesn't have to win. Because where Jesus is, truth reigns. And where truth reigns, captives walk free. I don't know how much time I have, but I know why I'm still breathing. It's not luck, it's not strength, it's grace. Undeserved, relentless, holy grace. That's what saved the Black Widow of Raqqa. That's what transformed me into a messenger of peace. And if he can do that with someone like me, what might he do with you? Now that you've heard my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like there's more going on in this world than what the news tells us? Like something is pulling strings behind governments, behind ideologies, even behind faith itself? I've lived it. I've seen it. And I'm telling you now, there's a spiritual war happening, and every soul is caught in it. I was part of the deception. I served the darkness thinking I was walking in the light. But then Jesus came, and he pulled me out. Not just from war, but from the system behind it. A hidden agenda that feeds on control, chaos, and fear. If you've ever questioned the world around you, you're not crazy. You're waking up. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment that shook your soul? Something that felt like a warning or a revelation? I want to read your story. And if this testimony spoke to something deep inside you, subscribe now to Truth from Beyond and hit the notification bell. Don't miss what's coming next. I have more to share, and so do others who've been through the fire and come out transformed. Now, watch the video that's appearing on the screen. It's another true encounter with the unseen war we're all a part of, and it confirms everything I've told you here. I'm Sister Paul. Thank you for listening, and remember, the truth isn't always safe, but it's always worth finding.